Good evening, and welcome to this month's All Hands meeting. It is certainly inspiring to see the ongoing dedication and all the energy that each of you bring to these meetings every month. As we move forward, though, please keep in mind, this is your meeting, and we welcome your suggestions and recommendations to make the meeting even better than it is. Now, today has been a historic day in San Mateo County. As I would think all of you know by now, there was a press release, a press meeting by the Board of Supervisors regarding the matter with the San Mateo Sheriff's Office. Huge report there on the press site on the public to read, but as I will say from a Fixin standpoint, we're profoundly alarmed by the finding of Sheriff Doris Cordell's report. We thank her for her efforts and all her findings, and we thank the Sheriff's Office. But this report underscores the urgent need for independent oversight to safeguard the public's trust and ensure accountability within our law enforcement. With that, I'll turn it back to the moderator and say that we'll wait for the findings to come out tomorrow in the Board of Supervisors meeting. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Raymond Goins. I'm a community organizer for Silicon Valley Debug. I am also with the communications team for Fixin San Mateo. It's my esteemed pleasure to introduce two phenomenal trailblazing women who lead the participatory defense team for Silicon Valley Debug San Mateo Hub, Lourdes and Nora. These two women have fought for equal rights and equal justice for everybody from the marginalized community, and use their voices to help empower and uplift other people's voices who otherwise would be deemed voiceless. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lourdes and Nora.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Lourdes Best. I'm an organizer with Silicon Valley Debug, particularly in San Mateo County, doing the work as participatory defense. And what Silicon Valley Debug is a storytelling, community organizing, and advocacy organization based in San Jose, California. However, our work is done across, the participatory defense model is done all across the United States and counting and growing. Silicon Valley participatory defense is a community organizing model that involves people facing charges. It's their families and their communities working together to impact impact the outcomes of their cases, to transform the power dynamics in the court system, to hold public agencies accountable, and to bring a community presence to the court process. And the way that we do that, it involves regular meetings where families and community members share knowledge. We have a method in which we learn from each other about how to partner with with the agencies that we're working with, whether that's your public defender, probation officer, or other entities. We help folks learn how to look at examining police reports and their court transcripts, understanding what happens at each different court proceedings, how to be prepared to come to court, understand what's going to be said at court, understand who the system players are at court, also building a community present in the courtroom, and bringing in one of the key things to our work is a lot of times people in the court a lot of times the judge tend to see people as the same in the court. People who are in custody, usually they're dressed in whatever color your county, designates for folks that are in custody to wear. In our county, it's orange. And so one of the things that we also help families do is work on something called a social bio packet. And pretty much what the social bio packet is, a packet where folks go out into their communities and they ask people who they know to write to their characters, to the person of to who they are in the community. And this information is brought back into court and submitted before the court players to have a better outcome in one's case. So that's a little bit about the work as far as what we do. Also, there's campaigning and organizing, bringing people to different spaces. As you know, we talked about today is a historic day in San Mateo County, and you know we are in those. We try to be in those rooms where the decision power is making over the communities in which are affected, like ours. So you'll see us at Board of Supervisor meetings or council meetings or wherever it needs to be. We want to make sure that we bring the families that are most affected to these spaces so we can make the changes that the changes over the circumstances in our communities. And that's pretty much more about what the work that we do. And I'll go ahead and give it over to Nora.
Yeah, wow, Lulu, thank you for that description. Everything that Lulu mentioned was applied with my family. So why does, Silicon Valley Debug do all of the wonderful things that they do? It's for people like Lulu and for me and our families. And so that we can, find empowerment, and take some positive actions in the midst of really hard, awful circumstances, dealing with a system that just is not set up to have us win, right? The people that need the help the most. And so with Debug, back in 2018, when I was connected with Lulu by, some type of intervention that she saw me and asked me if I was there to support a loved one. And of course I was. I had no idea what had happened over the weekend with my partner, and he was detained with ICE and away from us for 8 months. And it was Debug that really extended, and opened up the possibilities for me, because I had no idea what to do. In spite of, my own undocumented status from an early age, my partner, was taken from us, and it took 8 months to get him back. And we did a lot of work with Debug, and the campaigns, the GoFundMe's, the rallies and marches. It was just a harrowing time for us and our kids. We have 3. They're 7, 8, and 9 now. But everybody's doing great. And it's only because of the work that Debug and all the other organizations that have helped us, 12 of them, 13 now, local organizations that really have backed us up the entire way. And that's why we're still here. Hoping, and right now, we'll have another Christmas together. And it's been, 6 going on 7 this year. And that's why we continue as an entire family to do this work and be part of the solutions that we can bring to the table with our particular point of view and voice as the, part of the community that is vulnerable. And, it's an unfortunate time for us since last week with the immigrant community. But, we're still here. And I feel like moving forward, and with the 27 of the rest of you that are in this room, we'll continue with the work. And thank you for yours.
Thank you both so much. And Nora is also on the board of Fixin San Mateo County, which we're truly honored by. Silicon Valley Debug is such an important part of our community working with families, and we're really excited to bring in Mary Valdemar from the Inland Empire, who works with families in San Bernardino and Riverside County. She's been organizing in the inland region for over 25 years, and she began as a single mother and student at San Bernardino Valley College, where she learned grassroots organizing through MECA, La Raza Unida Caucus Parent Club and Associated Students. In 2012, she started, co-founded the Chicano Indigenous Community for Culturally Conscious Advocacy and Action, which is the only grassroots service cooperative in the Inland Territory. She works towards building the strength of the front line, fighting for decades on environmental justice, Indigenous rights, abolition, anti-racism, and land and water resistance. Mary currently works at San Bernardino Valley College in the library and student support area. She sits on Equal Employment Opportunity Committee, Arts and Lectures and Diversity, Safe Spaces, HSI, DEIA, and other committees where equity and inclusion are at the core of her work. She advocates there with students and youth at multiple campuses, along with parents, teachers, caregivers, and families directly impacted by many of the most urgent issues in our communities. And she's also joined by Sandra Serrano, one of the families they work with. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for that welcome. I put a little note in the chat just acknowledging the native land that I'm on. I'm on the occupied territory of the Yuhabiatam Marayam clan people, commonly known as the Serrano people or the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. I really want to start this conversation by doing a land acknowledgement and making sure that we remember that the first case of police brutality and state violence happened on these lands in 1492. And ever since then, we've had a series of communities who have been experiencing that violence at the hands of the state, at the hands of the police, at the hands of detention centers, at the hands of child protective services, at the hands of many, many, many state agencies and state-sponsored organizations that have caused harm to our communities at different levels. And we always start with that intersection because we want to remember as a community that so much of this work intersects. You know, I'm here on a community college campus. The word community is right in the name, you know, that we need to center the issues of our communities and know our communities and what's important to them, and how that intersects with the ethnic studies work, with the environmental justice work, with the abolition work, with the human rights work, with all of the work that we do as justice advocates, trying to serve the communities that have been left out. And that starts with acknowledging that this is stolen land, that there are stolen history, that we still have stolen labor that is happening to this day. So I want to be really clear about that. And I thank you so much for the welcome and the opportunity. And I encourage folks to also, if you want to share the ancestral land that you're on, if you want to share the ancestral land that your people are from, I would love to see that in the chat. And, you know, we create a practice of doing that. Like you heard in my biography, my name is Mary Valdemar. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya. I have been working here at the community college for quite a while, and time is ticking away. So I'm just going to jump right into our presentation. And I think we have a slide deck up. Can everybody see the slide deck?
Yes. Yes.
Great. So the thing I'm going to ask too is I am in the Inland Empire where we don't have the best infrastructure for internet access. And this is something our community struggles with as the largest county in the nation. So if my internet gets a little wobbly, give me like a little emoji that tells me like it's good or it's bad, you know, and let me know so that way I can turn off my camera if the internet is not allowing you to hear me and see the slides and all the presentation. So I came to this work, I've been doing this work a couple of decades, as folks have said. The case that really brought me to this work amongst my organizing, consciousness and as a student, growing my organizing skill sets and learning about issues that are impacting my community in the inland region was the justice for Taisha Miller. So next slide. And as we talk about some of these cases, Taisha Miller was really one of the first cases in our community where we got national attention about some of the violence that folks were experiencing. And if you're not familiar with Taisha's case, Taisha was a 19-year-old, young woman who was celebrating with her family, and had too much to drink. So she pulled over at a gas station to make sure she wasn't drunk driving. She was trying to do the responsible thing. And her cousin took off to go get other family members to help drive her home and drive the car home and, be responsible like that. And so they went to go get those folks and come back. Upon coming back to a gas station in the Riverside area, Taisha was in a dark gas station at night, young woman. And so she had a firearm in the glove compartment and put that on the seat as she slept. And she was trying to sleep it off. And the family got there. They tried to knock on the door and get Taisha to wake up. She was knocked out and not conscious, and they were afraid for her health. And so they called for medical attention. One of the biggest issues that we see as we work with justice families and we listen to the stories is that there's some patterns that we keep seeing over and over and over when we hear the stories of justice families. One of those is that often family or community is not trying to call the police, that they are trying to call for medical help or mental health assistance or mediation or other things that do not rise to calling the police out. And nevertheless, in our county, in our region, if you call 911 for any reason, the police are sent out. So the police came and the family was right there on site and they tried to explain the situation. But once they saw the firearm, there became an urgency to try to wake up Taisha. And, they banged on the window. And as they banged on the window, of course, Taisha startled and reached her hand towards the passenger seat and was shot by Riverside Police Department. This is a case that has had a lot of national attention. There were a lot of protests that started because of this. And, this was back in 1998, so this was some years ago. And we still have never really seen justice from this case. There's been a movie, there's been a lot of artists, and there's been a lot of attention, but most of the folks in the community do not feel like there was ever justice. From that case, that brings us to the case of Ernie Serrano. And my good friend Sandra is in the room, so I will give the mic to her to share a little bit, but I want to just talk a little bit about what happened to Ernie and how both the Taisha case and the Ernie case really brought together this focus of talking about how crisis is not a crime and using the hashtag crisis is not a crime. Ernie was having a mental health issue, and his family had originally called for some help and medical help, and that help was responded to by the police coming to the home. They escalated and agitated things with Ernie to the point that he was in the front yard and being tased and all that, and they ended up arresting him. The family requested that they be able to get Ernie into rehab. And so they were already moving behind the scenes to make those arrangements, and they asked for cooperation from the police department to make sure that he wasn't released on the streets. Of course, that did not happen. And Ernie was released onto the streets and ended up relapsing and going to a Stater Brothers. where he was trying to buy cookies. If you Google Justice for Ernie Serrano, you will see video, lots of video from customers in the store who recorded the entire situation. And as they recorded this entire situation, many of them were, explaining and trying to intervene on Ernie's behalf because he'd, spent a lot of time in that community and people knew him at the store. And they tried to say, hey, he's not doing anything wrong. He wasn't violent. He wasn't yelling. The description that was used to report and bring the police out was that his behavior was erratic. So really think about that word and what does that mean and the necessity of bringing the police out. And so, of course, if you look at the video, you will see that they ended up, hitting him with batons, tasing him, throwing him on the conveyor belt at the cash register. And it choked him to death. He asphyxiated on the cash register belt. You can even hear on the recordings as they debate what they're going to say and talk about, how they're going to frame this particular incident until one of the officers says he's not breathing. Then they immediately go into resuscitation and trying to revive him still on the conveyor belt. And ultimately, he passed away in the store. The Riverside County Sheriffs, led by Sheriff Chad Bianco, then tried to say that he passed away on the way to the hospital. But so many customers had recorded the situation in the store that they showed him being wheeled out and his face covered with a sheet, which implies that he had passed away on the scene. To this day, there's never been justice for the officers in this case. The Riverside Sheriff's Department, of course, has a relationship, like many of us know across the state, with the coroner's office as making a decision about whether police, are to be held accountable for, violence, or in this case, death or killing of a community member. And they determined that he died of drug use and not of asphyxiation. This is one of those cases where we believe super strongly that an independent, medical examiner, an independent autopsy would show a very different story, especially based on the videos that are, seen by the public. And that brings us to, so many other cases, but I just want to highlight these two because this connection about patterns and looking at the situations and the victims of police violence and police brutality is super important for us to center these stories as we even begin to think to work with justice families. We have to understand their trauma and their grief. And for many, many families, this is not just a one-time thing. This is intergenerational and happening over decades and generations of people in our community who, like I said, have been experiencing this violence from 1492. I want to go ahead and give Sandra a little bit of time to just speak to that or add anything to that you would. And Sandra, just go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Sandra Serrano. I'm Ernie Serrano's tia. Ernie and I were raised together, so Ernie was more like my little brother. His dad, who was my brother, was also murdered, ironically, on December 14th, back in 1986, right before Ernie was born. So Ernie never had a chance to meet his dad. And yeah, a little piece that I wanted to add, is part of the work that we do is not just, fighting for justice and, working with other grassroots organizations, and fighting out in the street. It's also, being and standing in solidarity with one another, connecting with other families, and doing the healing work. In my family, for example, we've had 3 generations of men murdered. My grandfather, my mom's dad, Silvestre Camacho, was murdered in Mexico. Ernie's dad, like I said, Theodore Serrano Jr. was murdered. And now Ernie, in December will be 4 years that he was taken from us. And some of the events that led up to to his death, ironically also had to do with, breaking these cycles of violence within our own families, breaking these intergenerational traumas. The day before, when we called the police, when we called for help with him, I'm sorry, when we called 911 for help, not wanting the police, but needing just assistance with him, we had gone to court for a domestic violence issue with one of my brothers. And so, here we were already dealing with, the anniversary of my brother's death, having to go to court with my other brother with a restraining order because of, their violent tendencies and violent behaviors onto us. And, here we are as mujeres, my daughter and I, trying to break these cycles within our own families, and to now have to, right, shortly, within that day, within those 24 hours, dealing with the court, my brother's death, and then to have two detectives show up at my home early the next morning, informing me that my nephew had died without giving me any explanation, any, anything. That they spent the first 15-20 minutes of our conversation just asking about Ernie and asking about our family, which I didn't think was a anything out of ordinary for us, because we have been as our family has dealt with so much violence. It was expected. And ironically, these same police department were the ones that we called for help when my daughter was physically assaulted by one of my brothers. And the same sheriff's department, Harupa Valley Sheriffs, did nothing to help with that. Instead, my daughter was shamed and forced, and was basically told the violence that was inflicted onto her by my brother was basically on her. And so, then for them to turn around and then now murder our loved one, it just seems so fucked up, to say the least. So yeah, part of the work that we do, is trying to heal, trying to create not just a better life for ourselves, but a better future for the next 7 generations. And let me tell you, it's hard work. It's hard work. As much as we try to, practice self-care and practice, like just trying to be on the road of healing. We have a lot of setbacks, and you get burnt out. You get burnt out of the just constantly seeing individuals get murdered and witness all this violence, not just in our communities, but throughout the world, and see that nothing's being done. As a matter of fact, I think it was just today I heard about this young man over the weekend that was murdered in Sacramento. So these occurrences are happening on a daily basis, and what are we doing to stop this? What can we do at this point? I recently just became a grandmother, and I'm concerned about the future for my grandson, because I know what the police is capable of doing. I know what's going on in the community, and I'm terrified of what could happen to him. And this is part of why we do this work, to protect the next generations so that they don't go through the same shit that we've had to go through.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story and sharing your words. And I appreciate everyone in the room giving space for us to really center Justice Families, because I think part of this work of collaborating with Justice Families is giving time and space for them to grieve, for them to share their stories, for them to share what they feel are the solutions. And, that brings us right to the next slide, which is, talking about the other cases that we have in the Inland Empire, and across the state. One of the cases that also has a strong component of crisis is not a crime was, of course, the case of Angelo Quinto. And some of you may be familiar with Angelo Quinto's case, but for us here in the Inland Empire, we saw an immediate connection between Ernie's case and Angelo Quinto. And we, got in some vehicles, took a caravan up north, went up there to connect with Angelo's family, and also were able to bring along our connections for some of our other organizations that do work with us. In this case, Beat Rock Records, which is the home of hip hop artists Bamboo, Rocky Rivera, Ruby Ibarra, who are all, hip hop artists in the Filipino community, and have worked closely with many of our communities here in the Inland Empire to, call for justice on multiple fronts. And so we were able to assemble a coalition called Kasamas y Carnales, which is Kasamas, which is our Filipino comrades, and Carnales, which is a lot of our folks in the Brown and Indigenous community, to come together about this question of mental health support for men in particular in our community, but all community members, and what happens when the police are called out for a crisis or mental health situation, and how that ends up with our loved ones being killed. Then that brought us to the case of Rob Adams, who was killed in San Bernardino, also caught on camera. And initially the San Bernardino Police Department said that he was running away, and then turned around and was facing them and was shot in the chest. Colin Kaepernick was able to help with an independent autopsy and showed that he was in fact shot in the back. Christopher Valadez's case in Rialto, and this is really highlights the opposition and the movement behind policing to push back against many of us who are fighting for justice with justice families. His mother and his family came out and did a mural in San Bernardino calling for justice for Christopher Valadez, who was killed by Rialto PD. One of the officers involved had transferred from Rialto to San Bernardino. So when he saw the mural, he called the city and had the city remove the mural as graffiti. They claimed that the mural was inciting violence against the police because it said, "Stop killer cops." And they interpreted that as "stop, kill a cop." And so, like, the ridiculousness of using, the system and the power structures at B to stop the fight for justice families, to bring awareness to some of these cases, is real and evident in our work as we, kind of feel like we're in the belly of the beast here in San Bernardino and Riverside, trying to fight these cases, at the local level. We've also had student cases on campus, autistic students, trans students, experiencing extreme brutality. And, even if it's not ending up with death, we know that there's a lot more harm that's unseen. Next slide. And that brings us to this really question about mental health and, looking at other issues that lead to state violence. Looking closely at what are the root causes and what is really happening in the system that is responding to asks for assistance, with death and violence. We know that trauma, intergenerational trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and fear play a role. Our community often has a lot of anxiety and fear because of generations of police violence that, are very particular to specific cultures and specific communities. We have a lack of gender affirming care, missing and murdered Indigenous women and people and Two-Spirit folks. Sexual assault survivors tell us that they experience a lot of violence at the hands of the police and trauma. Recovery, addiction, and harm reduction practices, are not accessible to many of our communities. We work with a lot of young folks. A lot of times folks, who want to get services, struggle to get services until it's like really, really advanced, like 5150 or drug addiction where they have to be, inpatient versus outpatient. And there's a lot of barriers to folks to get those services. And those are often exacerbated by a policing attitude that is very stigmatized and demeaning, and looks at folks in recovery as criminals instead of folks in trauma that need help. And that brings us to mutual aid, housing insecurity, poverty impacts, because this is an intersectional issue. It is not a silo of just violence against our community. It's poverty stacked on top of access to healthcare, stacked on top of no access to mental health care, stacked on top of substance abuse and education and all the other issues that our society faces together. And we see that those issues impact the same folks over and over and over again. And so there's a real need to look at more holistic solutions for folks, like mutual aid and housing. Death is basically the tip of the iceberg for justice families. And we know that far more violence and harm is unreported and unseen. So we need to create these spaces like this meeting right now, where justice families can come and share their story without the stigma and without the kind of blaming that happens for families that seek help for their loved ones. Next slide. So how do we get to the nitty gritty of supporting justice families? Like justice families tell us very clearly what they need. They need retreat. They need respite. They need rest. They need support. They need a space to be able to get through their grief. Sometimes that grief can be catalyzed into action, but it is also a tremendous amount of emotional labor. And many of our justice families get exhausted from the sheer frustration of dealing with the bureaucracy, the police department, the court system, the media, like the nonprofit industrial complex, like all of it is just layer after layer of red tape with very little guidance on how to maneuver that. Families need organizing support to help them be heard, seen, and to advocate. And some of that means we take the mic, as I'm doing right now today, but it also means that we need to give the mic and give spaces for families to get to that point where they can organize and build a base together, connect together, not just at the local level, but across the state and across the nation. They need safe spaces to do that, though. And without law enforcement, too many times we get called to participate in these conversations about policing, but folks want law enforcement to sit at the table. That is not a healthy way for families to be able to get through the grief process and talk about solutions, where they have, basically a symbol or an image of the person who has harmed their family in the most violent way, literally sitting across the table from them. Like there is a very, unreasonable idea that folks who are survivors or folks who are victims need to be able to, face their abuser, the person who's harming them, like instantly. Even our court system like demands that. And it is not healthy. It's not emotionally healthy. It's not brain developmentally healthy. It's not, healing healthy. It's not healthy in any way. We need to change that culture collectively and change and give space to families to not have to do that. Families also need help getting their stories of their loved ones in the media out to the community and out to decision makers. The police have instant access to press conferences, and the sheriff uses his position, as do other police chiefs and other folks, around the country, to be able to speak to the public in a way that, doesn't really get to what is the problem and continues to blame community for the incidents that happen, as though people, should bear the burden of their own death. There is no crime. There is no mental health situation. There is no, crisis that deserves for folks to be killed over that. And we have to keep uplifting that message as much as we can in order to help support the justice families who are feeling that. Next slide. I know I'm running out of time. I see it's already 7:43. there's some reasons why this impacts the inland region more than other regions. Our size, our lack of infrastructure, the practices that continue to focus on the IE, culture that allows violence to fester, like departmental gangs and high rates of suicide, divorce, self-harm, and substance abuse. Like, there's so many reasons. I think that could be a whole nother workshop. Next slide. We want to get to the place where we can actually collectively learn how to support justice families in a more concrete and significant way. And that looks like creating spaces, in person and online, where justice families can gather and connect with each other. We have a Facebook page, Justice Families IE, where we do that work, and we encourage families to connect with each other and support each other. We have community empowered solutions like collectives, cooperatives, mutual aid projects, community-led alternatives. So, every, organization and department has their place. Nonprofits have their place, but we also need grassroots organizations that are not hierarchical, that don't have an executive director, that are flat and representative of community interests without all the hierarchy and bureaucracy attached to those organizations. So how can we do that in a more community-based, grassroots way, and try to, take away some of the red tape that families have to deal with? They already have to deal with that in the justice system. To add that onto their own advocacy work is just incredibly frustrating for a lot of families. We need to provide more hotlines to report abuse, violence, and brutality outside of law enforcement. So I know CAT 911 is in the room, and there are other alternatives to calling the police, but we've got to work better as a state to stop the proliferation of every mental health incident has the police come out. Like that, that should not be the response of a majority of the cases that folks are being sent out to. We also learn about restorative and justice and decolonizing healing, and what does that look like? And then this goes right back to the land acknowledgement. How do we go back to a better way where Indigenous people, they had crime, there was murder, there was rape, there was, many of the crimes that we see today, not at the same level, but it existed. How did Indigenous people deal with that without prisons, without jails? There were consequences, but the role of restorative justice was much more focused on bringing people back to who they were. Where did they get lost? How did they fall between the cracks? And only in the most extreme circumstances were people removed from their communities and loved ones, and there was still rigorous accountability. There was still, amends making and restoration in place, but not the way that we do it today in the Western world. And so we have to start looking how that system perpetuates more violence, and how we're never going to get a solution if we don't decolonize that and start looking to our Native and Indigenous peoples around the world, not just here on this continent, Native ancestors and Indigenous peoples around the world, including Africa, including Asia, including all the different continents, had restorative justice practices. And we need to get back to that pre-colonial way of thinking. And then, of course, sharing data and reports. And so we have a report that came out, many of you have already seen it, the IE Lives Lost report, that talks about how in the Inland Empire, we are experiencing roughly twice the rate per capita of Los Angeles in people being killed by the police, double the rate. That's not an accident. And it's not something that's well known or well acknowledged because of our situation of being farther east and more rural. It doesn't get the type of attention that Los Angeles gets. We work in deep solidarity with our Los Angeles families. So this isn't an issue of us versus them. This is an issue of all of us. How can we help as organizers, as people who care about violence in our communities, as people who care about the future generations, as people who want the truth told about what is really happening both historically and today? How can we help justice families connect and better advocate and empower them to be able to do the work that they desperately need which is ultimately a part of their healing process. When we empower them to do that work, we help them heal. And when we help individual families heal, we help whole communities heal. When we help whole communities heal, we change the system so that this doesn't perpetuate into future generations, as my sister Sandra has said. So I ask you to join us in this work. Last slide, next slide. And we have some cases in the Inland Empire that we're working on right now. One of the biggest cases is Justice for Hugo Kachua in Ontario. Hugo was killed by an off-duty LAPD officer who was not supposed to be carrying a gun and was carrying a gun. They got into a fender bender. They got out of their vehicles and they started, arguing, and Hugo was shot. He was a 36-year-old young man here in Ontario, warehouse worker, a father of two, no record, just ridiculous. And it's been over 90 days, no charges against the officer, nothing. And so we continue to see this over and over. The Hugo's family has a gathering on the 30th of every month in Ontario. Ernie's anniversary is December 15th, and we try to have a gathering at the Stater Brothers in Harupa to honor and remember Ernie, and also to uplift the work and continue the fight for justice from both Stater Brothers and the Riverside Sheriff's Department. Jimmy Lopez in Hemet, which they've been actively doing actions every Saturday calling for justice for Jimmy Lopez. The Uhuru 3, which is not a specific police brutality case, but is tied to this police brutality work, because we are seeing a trend where community organizers who lift up justice families and fight against police brutality and excessive force are being targeted by local law enforcement and charged with conspiracy. We had that happen locally in the Inland Empire, a case called the Justice 8. And at the federal level, if you haven't been paying attention, you need to follow the Uhuru 3, which is being called the freedom of speech case of our lifetime, where Black community organizers in Tampa, Florida, and St. Petersburg have a community space there where they've been talking about police brutality and justice for justice families for decades. The chair is an 80-year-old organizer who was originally part of the SNCC committee with the Black Panthers and all the organizing, basically wrote the pamphlet that many of us as organizers follow to this day. The American Indian movement, the Brown Berets, all of that history. And he's being charged with conspiracy. Originally, they charged him with conspiracy with Russia because they said that the Uhuru community could not possibly be critical of the government unless they were working with Russian agents, which was insanely ridiculous. And of course, that charge was thrown out. We showed up in court in September. Over 100 grassroots organizers across the nation showed up in support of the Uhuru 3. And that has been reduced to just conspiracy. But if there's no Russia, who are they conspiring with? They're conspiring with other people against police brutality right here in the United States. They're conspiring with us, with the justice families, with other abolitionists and other people who know that the key to justice is for us to unpack and analyze and critique how this violence has been allowed to continue generation after generation after generation. So I call on you to please support the Uhuru 3. They're going to have a gathering December 15th and 16th in Tampa, Florida. Our Inland Empire Coalition will be taking another group out to do court support for the Uhuru family in Florida, as they have consistently supported our justice families here at the local level. And that's really the key, right? This coalition building and collaboration between Casamas y Carnales, between Black community, between Native community, between Brown communities, between all these communities is the key to us getting to a solution. And that is why it is getting the attention of the government to shut it down and charge us with conspiracy. It's ridiculous. So I hope you all can be allies and accomplices. And I know we're running out of time. Are there any questions?
Well, thank you, Mary, for this wonderful presentation and all of this very important information. And unfortunately, we don't have times for questions, but there are some in the chat if you want to go ahead and read them.
Yeah.
Before we do our closeout, I do have a few announcements for the group. And that is our call to action. And one of the very first ones is in light of the report released today by the Board of Supervisors regarding the sheriff's investigation, the Board of Supervisors is holding a special session tomorrow at 4 p.m. And we would love to have members make public comment regarding the sheriff's investigation, oversight, needing an inspector general, etc. And I know Nancy is putting all of this information in the chat as well. And then for some fun, on Tuesday, November 19th at 4:30, we're hosting our very first happy hour. It's a no-host happy hour at Worst Hall in San Mateo, located at 310 Baldwin Avenue, near the Caltrain station, so very easy to get to on public transportation. No RSVP needed, just come and bring friends and we can get together and chat. And then more fun in December, Friday, December 6th at 6 o'clock will be our annual holiday gathering. And it is at our location that we have it every year, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City, UUFRC, located at 2124 Brewster Avenue in Redwood City. And then finally, follow ICAC, which is the Independent Civilian Advisory Commission, and attend the ICAC meeting November 20th. And you can find out more about ICAC at the smcgov.org/ICAC. And we want to speak out to ICAC and the board regarding the findings from this report and about oversight in general. So thank you very much, and I will turn it over to RJ.
Hello, and thank you, Ms. Mary, for your beautiful presentation and the hard work that you're doing, and also for our debug team that was here as well today. And normally we do a gratitude practice, and I know that we, as a collective, have been in a bit of a flux or turmoil or over this last week and some of the decisions that have been made nationally and how it affects us locally. And what I think that we see and learn as we get together during these times is that we have the hard work still to do. That, a lot has happened, and some of us are having a harder time than others getting through this election. And yet, when we look at really what we're facing, it's really this sense of unity, connection, and continue to move forward. So what I just want to do is do a quick centering practice and then share a reading with you, a passage with you. So when we feel this sense of triggered, I really urge us all to find a way to reorganize ourselves around our nervous system. And what I mean by that is do a centering practice, whether that's your breath, a connection to the earth, a connection to the heavens. It's something that is the foundation of this land, of the stewards of this land long before we were here. And so we just take a breath, we feel the earth beneath our feet, and we take a breath up through the body, into the heavens, into the sky. This is our dignity, the length of our body into our dignity, as we see the dignity of others here on the screen. That when we're born, we are looking for safety, belonging, and dignity. And here we are. When we take another breath, which is our width, allowing ourselves to expand, that this is our social domain, how we connect out to others and cares for our community and how we allow others in. So allow this porous action to flow through our bodies, which is mostly atoms, which is 85% air. Let it flow through you. And the third breath is depth. Allow yourself to feel your back, that reptilian tail, the ancestral journey that got us to where we are. And they had a tough journey getting us here. So we know we've got it. And we always know they're at our back. We don't have to manufacture the answer. It flows through us. So feel them there. And the front is longing for what is possible, for what we're moving toward. That we're not fighting against, we're fighting for. And the fourth breath is our organizing principle, what's most important to us. That we are committed to leaving this earth in much better shape than we found it. And I'm going to read a short passage for you here from the Radiant Sutra by Lauren Roche, who spent his life translating Sanskrit to English, a conversation between the divine, between the masculine and the feminine. And I just thought it was appropriate as we get through this election week. I just have to get comfortable finding glasses now. You are stunned, powerless. You thought you knew what was going on. Now you realize you don't have a clue. You are stopped in your tracks. Everything within your skin is shaking. Enter the shaking. Get curious. Look around inside with wonder. Unmind your mind. All the walls have fallen down. Go ahead and dissolve. The one who has always been, who has seen much worse than this, is still here. You are stunned, powerless. You thought you knew what was going on. Now you realize you don't have a clue. You are stopped in your tracks. Everything within your skin is shaking. Enter this shaking. Get curious. Look around inside with wonder. Unmind your mind. All the walls have fallen down. Go ahead and dissolve. The one who has always been, who has seen much worse than this, is still here. I want to thank you all for this evening. I'll pass it over to Nancy.
Just to say thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and especially Silicon Valley Debug for starting us off and sharing what you do in the community with families. And Mary, you and Sandra for coming with your honesty and for all you're doing in the Inland Empire. And I'm so glad we do have you, Mary, and the others in the California Coalition for Sheriff Oversight, because those counties that we work together every month with are very powerful, and we will make change. So thank you, everyone. We'll send a recording and a link to the PowerPoint to people. And then I'm sorry we didn't have time for your questions in chat. There's some really good ones.
I will follow up with the email and try my best to answer some of those questions so folks can read a response later.
That would be great. And I did save the chat, and I'll share the transcript too. Thank you, everyone.